Hello and welcome to our Summit County State of the River. We're so excited to have you all here tonight. Thank you so much for coming out. This is our 8th of 9 State of the Rivers that the Colorado River District puts on every spring. So we're in the home stretch, but we always love coming to Summit County and here in Silverthorne and working with our wonderful partners to put these events on. My name is Marielle Cowden. I am the Director of Public Relations here at the River District. And I just want to take a few moments to do some housekeeping first. Make sure everyone who has cell phones with them, which I'm assuming is everybody, if you could put those on silent, just to make sure that no calls interrupt our speakers tonight. We would much appreciate that. Also, just to note that we will be doing our Q&A tonight at the very end of the program. So if you have questions for any of the speakers tonight, make sure you write those down. We have notepads on our table in the back. Type them into your phone, whatever you want to use, and we'll just save all our Q&A for the end so that all speakers have adequate time. Now, I just want to do a couple quick thanks to the partners who help put this on every year. First of all, the Blue River Watershed Group. They're local here in Summit County and they do great work. If we could give them a round of applause. I'll be inviting Kendra up here in just a moment for a few words of welcome. And then I also want to thank Summit County, who put in a lot of effort this year to work with us on this program. Josh Blanchard, who's one of your county commissioners, he sends his apologies. He has a tour with a White House representative today that took him out in the field. And so when the White House calls, you answer. So he is not here, but will probably be here later in the evening. But just wanted to give a shout out to him for all the work that he's put into this as well. I also want to say hello and thank you to the Colorado River District has a board of directors, and our Summit County director is Taylor Hawes, who's sitting up front here. So thank you, Taylor, for being here and for all your wonderful work. I also want to call out all the Colorado River District staff, many of whom will be here presenting tonight. So if River District staff can raise their hands, that would be great. So we're all going to stick around. If you have any questions for us beyond the Q&A, we'll be hanging out for a little bit afterwards. And we're here to help. We're your River District to be an ear and a voice for you throughout the state. So with that, I will bring up Kendra to give a little welcome. Welcome, Kendra.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you can turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself at some point, because these are the people in this room that make a difference locally, and we are so grateful for your attendance. So the Blue River Watershed Group has a lot to owe to you all for putting this event on every year. We're so grateful that this information can get out to you all, and we just ask that you take one little nugget from today and share it with somebody you know in your community to spread the word. So thanks so much for being here.
Yes, thank you, Kendra. All right, and one last thing before we get going in terms of just notes to keep in mind. We'll have a lot of slides tonight, presentations that have a lot of data, a lot of details. We will be putting all of these PowerPoint presentations up on the River District's website. So if there's a slide and you miss something and you're like, oh no, I didn't get to see what that graph said, what that number was, just don't worry, we'll have it up on the website in a few days. Oh yes, and we want to have one more special shout out. Do not want to forget, we want to thank Heather Beckman and the Colorado Marketplace and Bakery for the wonderful food tonight. So if we could give them a round of applause. This is our second year with Heather and her crew, and they just do such a fantastic job. So thank you so much for being here. And please, if there's more food, make sure you go back for seconds. All right, with that, I would like to bring up our first presenter. He's one of our River District staff. It's Brendan Langenhausen, who's the Director of Technical Advocacy, and he's here to talk about the outlook for Water Year 2023, what has happened, and what is to come. So welcome, Brendan.
Good evening. All right, we're going to get this going. I think it's up. I'm going to take a quick moment, and we're going to look at a few different scenarios, hydrology from different angles to kind of catch us up from the water year. So the water year starts in October and goes all the way through September. And so kind of looking over this winter, what is setting up for the hydrology for this year? We're going to look at the big river basin, the big Colorado River Basin, and then kind of work our way into the state's level and then into more of the Summit County region. So that's the overview. The headlines from this last year is drought to floods. So as you guys are aware, up here in the headwaters, the last couple of years have been really dry. The last 3 years, we've had really dry scenarios. just haven't had the moisture that we love to ski and love to boat and fish on. And that's really dictated, especially all across the West. Even most recent, or this last year with the record-setting lows of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. But this winter kind of changed. Instead of record-setting lows, it was record-setting snowpack in the winter. We had 31 atmospheric rivers that really came through and just pounded the Sierras, pounded the West Coast, and we got that impact as those storms made their way east across the U.S. And so it's been a big relief. So that's kind of the story here. We're going to dive a little bit more into some of that snowpack. The outlook for 2023, we are ending a triple dip of the La Nina. So the La Nina in the ENSO graphs kind of goes down, and it was called the triple dip. So that's 3 years in a row that we've had La Nina years, which typically favor the north. That didn't necessarily happen, kind of happened this year, but the south also got it. El Niños are traditionally more down in the southern part of the U.S. So in Colorado, I've heard it explained, north of I-70 is generally good they get a higher snowpack in La Nina years. South of I-70, you're looking at El Niños are the years that you're looking for that higher snowpack. Lake Powell had a forecast of 148% of inflows, so that's great. Above average inflows are forecasted to Lake Powell. And some of the more local reservoirs, Wolford Mountain Reservoir, which is a river district reservoir over there by near Kremling, will fill this year, which is great. Blue Mesa Reservoir down on the Gunnison Basin, it will be filling some this year, which is fantastic. It's really been at maybe not record-setting, but very, very low levels the last couple of years. And the CBT project, which you'll hear about more later, with Granby Reservoir, is also projected to fill this year, which is fantastic. So good news after a lot of droughts and a lot of more dismal news, standing up here talking about how dry it is. It's fun to talk about water and have all the excitement of a good snowpack and a good runoff. So this I thought was just absolutely fascinating. This is from Scripps Institute. So those 31 atmospheric rivers that I was talking about that brought all that snowpack and flooding and rains to California, this is where they all hit over this last winter. So pretty interesting to see where they were and the intensities of each of those storms. But to have 31 atmospheric rivers in a year is unheard of. They created all this snow that we heard a lot about. I'm assuming some of you guys ski, and these are really fun pictures to look at if you're a skier. So that was great. And this is more on the science side of it. This is looking at the percentage of medium snowpack. And so on, I believe this is April 15th, you can see where all those atmospheric rivers just came and dumped a lot of snow. Even over into the Arizona area where some of those watersheds had 700% of median snowpack. Now, I don't know how much snow they actually had in the desert to begin with that created the median. So 1 foot might have set them over 700%, but in general, you can see a lot of those percentages are 200% or higher. If you look all the way over going east, you see the polygon there that has 126% of average or of median snowpack. That's the Colorado River Basin. So that's where we fit in. And you can start to see, and this is going to be a theme that we'll talk about, on the east side of the divide, it's average or below average snowpack was kind of the theme. So those storm systems made it all either to the divide or almost to the divide, but then it just didn't go all the way over. And so you really get to see this definitive line along the continental divide. Just to give some context, you'll see the slide again later in some of the presentations, but this is coming from that drought to the flood. So following this drought, these reservoirs have been really heavily relied on. Particularly Lake Powell, it was in the news a lot of record-setting lows, and Lake Mead. So just to give you an idea of how full those reservoirs are, just wanted to throw this up here as we talk about inflows. I also wanted to talk about Blue Mesa, 44% full. There was a lot of releases made out of Blue Mesa to help boost the levels in Lake Powell. And so that really carried that reservoir lower than it traditionally has been. All right, so with this great snowpack, we have above average snowpack everywhere. What does that mean for Lake Powell? It's been in the news about these low flow or these low levels. Well, they're looking at 148% of average inflow, or about 11 million acre feet coming in, which is fantastic. So that's really good. So a lot of water coming in. This chart kind of shows that. So this is how the forecast has looked throughout time. So that blue line, that squiggly line, that's their forecast set by the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. So as the winter proceeds and as we get snowpack, we can kind of see how much snow we have and what that might equate to as far as a runoff. And so you can see the big storms in March really push that up. The other part of this, and the reason I'm explaining this is we'll have a few more of these to look at. On the bottom in orange is how much inflow has been seen to date. And so about 4 million acre feet has flown into Lake Powell since the beginning of April. So just looking at kind of talking about how do we track snow? How do we track inflows coming in and what's expected as compared to observed flows in the stream? So that's what we're looking at for Lake Powell. These are some projections put out by the Bureau of Reclamation for Lake Powell and Lake Mead, just setting up some context for what you're going to hear about a lot more tonight. So these are 24-month studies or 24-month projections, but I'm just going to cover this really quickly. The blue line is, kind of an optimistic probable maximum of what could happen for Lake Powell levels. The green line is the most probable, and the red lines are the probable minimum flows. So you can see the solid line is actually what's happened, historical, and then those are all projections. So what I really want you to take away from this is what the Bureau of Reclamation is showing here is that Lake Powell levels are not likely to dip, in the next 2 years, are not likely to dip below where we are right now. So with these great inflows, Lake Powell is going to come up. It's going to fluctuate, but it's not going to fully fill. It's still going to be low, but we should see some of that levels. And the other thing with the 11 million acre feet coming in, it's going to jump about 80 feet. So that's all to take away from that, just kind of looking at it, but I found it interesting, especially with all the news on Lake Powell. This is the same thing for Lake Mead. It's a little bit of a different story. Going out 2 years, it might drop to below where it is now, but this is just kind of an idea and projections of what are we thinking will happen with these two reservoirs that have been in the news so much. Okay, moving in on the state level, this is our snowpack as of yesterday, percent of average snowpack. So in the Colorado Basin is about 120%. You can see those big storms that really came through that hit the southwest region. And so they are still sitting on a really strong snowpack. And then up north, the Yampa and the White, 115%. They're still, the Yampa River is really flowing right now. It's really picking up steam if you watch stream flows, so it's fun to see that. But this is a good indicator of the snowpack on the other side of the divide. You see that difference there of snowpack, and so the South Platte and the Arkansas have melted off. They didn't have the snowpack as much as the western slope did, and it's also starting to melt a little quicker than historically. This is the precip, so looking at precip since October through the water year. Again, heavily favoring on the west slope. Now, I'm going to show something in just a minute that will show what's changed in the last 2 weeks with all the rain that Denver's gotten. So, but real quickly, just kind of look at that. Greens are average, yellows are below average, and those blues are the above average precip this winter. This is the precip that I was talking about. So this is the last 2 weeks, and all those dots are different gauges around the state. And so you can see between, I know Denver's not there, but Denver's roughly around here, Colorado Springs down here-ish. There's about 8 inches, up to 8 inches of rain that has fallen in the last 2 weeks between there. So that map that we were just looking at is going to look a lot different at the end of May. And I was just hearing that there's even another inch or so of rain forecasted this next week. So this precip is really hitting the Front Range. And I know Nathan at Denver Water is going to talk some about how that's impacting their operations out here on the West Slope. So be tuned for that. This is the snowpack from Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, kind of monitors snowpack as well. This is a really fun website. If you guys have a chance to, and you're into this hydrology, come find me and I can give you the website. But the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center is really fun. Lots of different data to look at. This shows the snowpack across, as of today, it's rough. It's an approximation based off of SNOTEL sites, but this is, the West Slope has a lot of snow. There's still a lot of snow compared to average or median snow water equivalents. But as you move east, it's a lot less. It's below average, and particularly Summit County. So for Summit County, you guys got that bullseye, but not in a good way, where the snowpack just wasn't as great as it was in a lot of the surrounding basins. And I don't know why that is. I can't answer that question. But it is really interesting that this basin was below average. You can see those triangles, and they're kind of orangish for Summit County. There's one at Green Mountain Reservoir and one at Dillon. And they're orange, saying that the projected supply for this basin is about 85, roughly, percent of average runoff for this year. So they're about 85. Everywhere else is generally on the West Slope 100% or more. So just a little different. You guys are unique this year. ASO, or Airborne Snow Observatories, does some flights over here. And I think we've shared some of these at previous State of the Rivers, but they're funded by the state and Denver Water and some other stakeholders to really get a strong understanding of the snowpack. And so we traditionally have relied on just having a couple sites throughout the state where they measure snowpack. But those are just unique sites, and there's maybe a handful of them in every basin. What they do, what ASO does, is they take a plane and they fly it and they really measure it. So the entire watershed. And they did that again this year, and then this is everything above Dillon. And so over here you can see some of these darker colors are where the snow is the deepest. In the lighter colors, it gets more shallow. But the other thing I wanted to kind of show is over here where you can see where your snow lies, which as a scientist, I really enjoy this kind of information. So it's really neat. So about 11,000 feet, if you want to find snow, that's the place to go. That's where it's all sitting right now. And particularly in the 10-mile basin. So it's just that I find it fascinating. I think you guys live here. You get to look up in the mountains, and you probably already know this. But that's where it sits for this year. That's the uniqueness of this year from ASO. This shows just a quick graph of the snowpack. So the blue line, squiggly line, is the snowpack growing throughout the year, and it started to melt off, and that's the line as it drops down. The red line that comes up, that's when ASO flew. So they flew this basin on April 15th, and so you can kind of see what the level of snow was when they were here. They've been having we've had so much rain this spring that they've had a hard time getting up into the skies and flying at exactly when he wanted to. So ideally, it would be right at the peak, and we could get a really strong indicator. But they did pretty well, and they got pretty close and gave us some really good information. This is the cool stuff, too. So from the ASO data, the flights, here's the 3D image looking at the basin. And so again, those darker colors, the blue is 2 meters or so, and the reds and the whites are 0, but the reds are coming down in snowpack from the 2+ meters. And so you can see the 3 ski resorts that I've had labeled there. You can see some of those runs even, which is really neat. And you can also see where the snow lies. So this is the wind side, where the winds come up and sweep all the snow off the mountains. And it gets all deposited in these nice, deep, dark blue basins. So that's where the skiing's still good. That's where you want to go if you're a skier. But yeah, pretty fun. I have another one here of Copper Mountain. Again, you can see some of those same patterns. What I like about Copper is you can also see the half pipe right here is really deep. All right, so real quickly, this is going to be some of the Blue River Basin, the Blue River watershed. This is the forecast for the runoff forecast for above Dillon Reservoir. So we're looking at about 80% of average inflow, and that was right there at the beginning of May. So it looks like these pink lines are the official forecast, but they kind of do daily forecasts, and so it might jump up a little bit with some of the recent rains. This is for the Blue River down at Green Mountain, so about 235,000 acre feet, about 84% of average. And then these are flows. So the CBRFC also does forecasted flows. So this is good for boaters. If you want to know what the projections are going to be this weekend for snowpack or for stream flows, this is a good site to look at. But this is what we've observed, and this is what is forecasted over the next couple days, the next week actually. And these kind of show, are you above average or below average for this time of year? Just to give you a sense of where we fall historically. So about average, but the flows are increasing. This is the Blue River right above Dillon. This is 10 Mile Creek. So flows are going to get spicy up to about 600 CFS, maybe tomorrow, and then kind of level off. And here is, what is this? Oh, this is peak flow for the 10 Mile Creek. So what would the peak flow look like? Or what is the projections for peak flow in 10 Mile Creek? And so what this is telling me is this is kind of the projections from CBRFC of what that peak flow might be. This is where we've been. So we're coming up and approaching it. This is the average peak flow, about 800 CFS. This is flood levels. So this is a good thing to kind of check if you're worried about flooding near a certain area. We are nowhere near that this year and not projected to be anywhere near that. And this is the time period where the peak flows generally happen. So we're getting close, about 630 CFS is what CBRFC is saying, and that could happen over the next 3 weeks. So, and then projections for outlook for the next 3 months for this region. We're over here. So temperatures, it's likely to be warmer than average and looking to be a little bit average or equal chances of average of dry or wet, or maybe a little bit leaning dry over the next 3 months is what the NOAA is saying for this area. So that's all I have for you. Hopefully that sets a good scene. You kind of have a sense of where we're at and where we're going as these other speakers come up today. So thanks for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Brendan. And water is fun to talk about, and you make it especially fun, so thank you for that. We also know it's very complicated, and that's why we love to have these State of the River events, not only because we get to come out as River District staff to meet everyone in our very widely diverse 15 counties of the River District to make sure we're protecting West Slope water in all the ways that all these different regions and counties use and appreciate water, but making sure that we're explaining all these complicated issues at every level. So whether it's technical, whether it's political, social, we want to make sure that our constituents in our River District know what's going on and have the information they need. So right now we're going to zoom out a bit and look at the big river. We're going to kind of look at the context of the Colorado River Basin as a whole and the impacts it has on West Slope residents and residents of Summit County. And so to do that here tonight, we have my lovely colleague, Lindsay DeFreitas, who is our PR and media specialist. So welcome, Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. As Marielle mentioned, my name is Lindsay DeFreitas. I'm the PR media specialist with the Colorado River District. And we are going to zoom out a little bit. It's so nice to be in this room and see a lot of faces that are both familiar to me and new. It speaks to the fact that this conversation needs to happen, and it needs to happen all across our district. So looking at what we're going to talk about with my presentation, just to tell you where we're going, we're going to talk a little bit about the Colorado River crisis. Yes, we all know there's a crisis. We're going to look at some of the solutions and unintended consequences that have occurred in the last very slow-moving, casual conversations surrounding these issues in the last 3 months. No, it's been moving really fast. So we're going to cover some of that. And then we're going to end on how we can protect West. We're going to talk a little bit about the Colorado River crisis. Yes, we all know there's a crisis. We're going to look at some of the solutions and unintended consequences that have occurred in the last very slow-moving, casual conversations surrounding these issues in the last 3 months. No, it's been moving really fast. So we're going to cover some of that. And then we're going to end on how we can protect Western Colorado by engaging further in these issues. So a brief introduction about who we are, in case a few of you in here are not quite familiar with us. The Colorado River District is a small government agency. We're based in Glenwood Springs, but we represent the water users of 15 counties across the western slope of Colorado. We encompass everything from Moffat County to Uray, from Mesa County all the way at the Utah border up to here, up to the Continental Divide, and that's the headwaters of the Yampa White Green, the Colorado, the Blue, and then the Uncompahgre and the Gunnison. All of that is within our district. We were formed in 1937 as a way to unite the voices of the Western Slope to advocate for the water users here in an area that we knew was never going to win when it came to a numbers game. So the Western Slope of Colorado right now holds about 10% of the population of the entire state. So we knew that we had to speak with a unified voice. We were formed the same year that the Colorado Water Conservation Board was formed, and also our sister organization, the Southwest Water Conservation District, which represents the basins of the Dolores and the San Juan. So we have about 22 employees. There's a bunch of them here in the room tonight, and our mission is two parts. One part is to protect, conserve, and develop the water interests within our district. And that looks like a lot of different things. We have technical advocacy with our engineers who are involved in conservation conversations, in upgrading infrastructure, coordinating with our Front Range partners, and making sure that we are managing our own water assets appropriately in Elkhead Reservoir and Wolford Reservoir. We have legal representation that makes sure that we show up at the table whenever West Slope water is under discussion. When water law changes might impact our water users, we have people in those rooms. And then we have a lot of information and outreach, and that can look like things like tonight with Marielle and I going around the whole district. It can look like working with policymakers who need the best up-to-date information to make decisions that are going to affect our futures, and we make sure that we are engaged in those conversations. Again, we were created to be the watchdog of West Slope water, and that's one of the biggest parts of our mission. The second part of our mission is one that has gotten more headlines recently, for better or for worse, and that's to be engaged in the conversation where we advocate for the waters of the Colorado River at the interstate level. So we do a lot in our office. Looking at the context of where we are, you guys have probably seen this map several times if you've been to our events, but it's just helpful to keep in mind. The black lines all around the outside represent the Colorado River Basin and encompasses parts of 7 states. Our district is here in light blue. Those are those 15 counties that we were talking about. And I know that Marielle introduced Taylor Hawes. She is one of our board of directors. We're governed by a board of directors. And they have representatives from each of those 15 counties. So we have 15 counties who all sit in the same room and have very different interests and voices, as you all are familiar with any community on the Western Slope. Interestingly, if you combine the output of water from these two districts, Southwest Conservation District and us, we create about 65 to 70% of the natural flows of the Colorado River where it goes through Lee's Ferry. So even though we won't win for numbers, we are huge when it comes to water. And so we take that very, very seriously. We have all of these people, 40 million people, 30 independent tribal nations, and 7 states, all depending on this river, 2 countries. We involve Mexico as well. And everyone is interested in the next steps. These groups of gray over here represent areas that divert water across the natural divide, and they rely on it as well. So you have the Wasatch Front with Salt Lake City up here, Front Range communities all the way down to Colorado Springs and out to Greeley, here in New Mexico, and then of course the metroplexes in Southern California of San Diego and Los Angeles, and then of course some major population centers in Arizona within the basin. So again, tremendous amount of people are impacted by these conversations. And in a recent poll, we were unsurprised to find out that West Slope residents are paying attention. So we discovered that there was also a lot of agreement, a lot of bipartisan coming together about these issues as well. The numbers speak for themselves here. 92% of the voters agree that the Colorado River Basin and streams are important to West Slope economy. 97 feel that out-of-state water interests like California pose a threat, which we're going to talk a bit more about in a minute. And then 98% are even concerned about investment firms purchasing water rights on the Western Slope. So any one of these pieces of the polling could be an entire evening's conversation. So you'll have to excuse me as I talk quickly to try and cover a lot of this in a very short time. And we're going to dive deep into some things, and we're going to move quickly through others. And again, there'll be Q&A at the end, so make sure you write them down as you think of them. Could you just take a minute and raise your hand if you in this room have ever been personally victimized by a friend or family accosting you at a backyard barbecue or on nights out getting some drinks when they asked you something about the levels of Lake Powell? Has anyone had their night ruined by a friend or family member asking you to personally explain what is going on with Lake Powell? Yep, there's a few of us in this room. Raise your hand if that didn't used to happen. Okay? It used to just be very niche. You only spoke to the people who came to these events. You weren't going to get brought up. I mean, I was sitting in the hotel across the road this morning, and this older couple asked me what I was doing. Oh, I work for the River District. So what about that drought? Okay. It's been in a lot of headlines. It's been in headlines locally, it's been in headlines at the national level, so there's a lot of people paying attention. If you were watching the news today, there's new headlines rolling out, so it is an ongoing conversation. And again, the River District does our very best to stay up on top of all of these headlines. If you haven't signed up yet for our news drop, too, you can get a lot more of these headlines directly in your inbox. We do a good job of that. How did we get to this? How did we end up in crisis? We know it's happening. Here is a very, very quick review, a very short history lesson. In 1922, a bunch of states got together and decided to split the river's flow in half. They said, upper basin states of Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, you can develop 75 million acre feet averaged over 10 years, or about 7.5 each year, million acre feet. And lower basin states, you can develop your 7.5 million acre feet each year, however you would like to do it. And they just recognized that population growth was happening at a very different pace in Southern California, and for Colorado to be able to keep up with that, we needed to sort of have it split. So we started to operate separately with the assumption that we were all playing the same game by the same rules and that it was going to be an even split. Up in front of me here, you can see that that's not exactly how it happened. In the conversation, again, we also involved another country. Later on, after the compact was written, was inked, it became an international treaty. And so there's just a lot of players here. And what's happened over time is that the lower basin has consistently overused or overdeveloped their water resources. They are not necessarily held accountable for the evaporation and transit losses, while the upper basin states are bound by hydrology. I don't have to tell you that when the snow is gone and when the rivers drop, that you're done irrigating. Or you have to look at a different municipal source if it's going too low for the infrastructure that was built 80 to 100 years ago. All of that governs our daily life. It governs our decisions. It governs our water-making policy every single day. And we've never lived outside of those rules. We can't. We're not downstream from a major savings account that you can withdraw from whenever things get a little bit low. The lower basin states have always been downstream of two savings accounts, and so they haven't had to face those same year-to-year adjustments that we do in the upper basin, and that has also led to this. So over the course of the last, I think this is just 10 years, but it plays out, we are consistently using much, much less than what is on paper. And again, one of the things that we just want to keep hitting on, people are like, why? How does this happen? How could the lower basin possibly use that much water? And the reason is that they are not held accountable for evaporation and transit losses, whereas here it's taken out of our account before we really access it. It just is it's baked into how we manage water. Our state, the upper division states all take that into account already, and the lower division states don't. So if you hear conversations about the lower division states offering solutions, this is really the solution we want to see baked into the system so that we're all playing by the same rules. This consistent overuse has left us here. These are the reservoirs as of yesterday. And honestly, I had to change this graphic because they've gone up quite a bit in the last few days. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but Lake Powell has increased by 20 feet, maybe more, 14. I'm sorry, I don't have that on top of my head. But you can see that it is all the way up to almost 30% full. Yes. Almost 30%. Lake Powell is the upper division state's kind of storage. It just happens to be below us. And then Lake Mead is always just a little bit ahead this time of year at 30% full. We do see some real bright points over here, though. As Brendan mentioned, Blue Mesa is making a big recovery. It was way, way down here. And then Flaming Gorge at the top of the system. And these three, and Navajo, these four reservoirs, along with a few smaller ones, all work together to meet our compact obligations to make sure that we're sending that 75 million acre feet over 10 years down to the lower basin as per our interstate compact. An interesting fact, if you remember the graphic on the previous slide of the evaporation, the amount of water that evaporates from that system is a little bit more than the entire storage of Blue Mesa Reservoir. If you've ever been to Blue Mesa, imagine that amount of water whoosh, disappearing out of the system every year. So there's some perspective. And it hasn't quite explained why that's all made it into the headlines. But we're going to go back just 1 year now and look at some more recent events that have propelled those headlines to national attention. At a congressional hearing, Commissioner Camille Touton requested that we identify how to cut, and we being 7 states, 2 to 4 million acre feet of consumptive water use to bring the system back into balance. Now, she represents the federal government that manages a lot of the infrastructure, the Lakes Mead and Powell, Hoover Dam, Glen Canyon Dam, and a lot of our upper basin Colorado River storage project developments. And she said 2 to 4 million acre feet, and she said you have 60 days to do it. Get on there. If you've ever tried to imagine 7 states agreeing on anything in 2 months, you can imagine how those conversations went. Some bright points did come out of it. The Upper Colorado River Commission did have their 5-point plan developed and sent into to the feds in a timely fashion, offering some realistic and actionable solutions that we could do to say we're doing everything we can to keep these numbers in balance, but we all need to recognize that the vast majority of those cuts are just going to have to come from the lower division states. So, some other things that have happened, which I'm going to move through quickly. 6 out of 7 states agreed, 1 did not. California. On other ways that we could move ahead in this conversation and other things that we could do to make these cuts as equitable as possible. Because again, it's easy to get away from the fact that we're talking about communities' futures. And when we say we need to come up with an equitable distribution of cuts, that's exactly what we mean. 40 million people, 30 tribal nations, 7 states, 2 countries. These decisions are not just massive 365-page PDFs that get sent around. They are the future of this entire basin. So while it's moving quickly, it is so important to try to keep up with it. And again, the biggest point with those 6 states was accounting for that evaporation and transit loss. Some other recent things that came up, the Bureau of Reclamation was looking at different ways to manage these reservoirs, and they had an open discussion, an open supplemental environmental impact study comment period, which is now paused because of some recent changes and developments just on Monday morning as the lower basin states are offering a different plan to move forward. I'm not going to get into that too much. We have Commissioner Mitchell here to go into that next on a little bit of a deeper level. But you can see, even as I'm just talking, all of these things are changing so rapidly. Just on Saturday, at the state level, Governor Polis signed into law the bill, Senate Bill 295, which created the Colorado River Drought Task Force. And this is a group of representatives from agricultural producers, state and local governments, water providers on the front range and on the western slope, environmental organizations, and then the conservation districts. And their job is, over the next 6 months, to come up with actionable recommendations for next year's General Assembly legislative decisions to allow them to address how can we face a future where the system and the math just doesn't add up. And so this snowpack has given us just a few minutes, just a few months to maybe take it a little bit slower and come up with some really good decisions, but we can't wait too long. We see the snow outside on the mountains still here at the end of May, and that's wonderful, but the entire system is still in crisis, and just imagine what would have happened without that snowpack. If it had been a 4th year of exceptional drought conditions on the western slope, it would feel so different from me just standing here having these conversations because it would be more in our face. Again, West Slope residents, we love you. You are paying attention. You are coming together. We are working with partners in all kinds of different water user sectors because we know how important it is. 94% of voters think that the loss of farmlands, ranches, and orchards and the availability of water for agriculture are serious issues. If there's one thing that we learned from the pandemic, it is important to have your food as close as possible because supply chains can be unreliable. And so we have to recognize the importance of agriculture in this conversation as well. 98% are still concerned about investment firms purchasing water rights on the western slope because as we look at how to make these cuts and how to compensate people for them in a reasonable way, money comes into play. And when money's on the table, people who are interested in making more are going to show up there as well. And the River District is definitely keeping an eye out for that. You'll hear conversations around 2 different programs that are sort of connected to that, ways that we can take consumptive water and put it back into the system. And these two programs, they have a lot of similarities there in the middle, but they also have some critical differences. So if you hear people talking about demand management or the System Conservation Pilot Project, which is over here, SCP, here's their similarities. If we're talking about taking consumptive water and putting it into the system, it will be voluntary, temporary, and compensated, no matter what it is. It will also probably not be a free market program. It'll be a government-created program. The funds will not be a neighbor selling their rights to their neighbor, and so we're not talking about free market. And then they'll all have potential long-term consequences for local agriculture, and they're both designed to address system shortages. Picture that teacup graphic that I brought up before. When we say we're conserving water in the system, that's sort of what they're protecting, the infrastructure, the investments that they have at stake with a really low level of Lake Powell or Lake Mead. And I'm going to move on from those because, again, this is sort of what we're hoping that we can get some more actionable solutions on in the next few years. So as a summary of what the River District's doing, again, we will continue to provide up-to-date science, data, and modeling to all of the people that we have relationships with who are making decisions which will affect our future. We're going to drive that conversation forward at the interstate and federal level, and we're going to continue to call for lower basin evaporative and transit loss accounting. So that is that second part of the mission when we're looking at the big picture. What are we doing outside of the state to make sure that Colorado River and the Western Slope is protected? But I can't leave you on just all the doom and gloom. We have to end with my favorite part of the conversation, which is what are we doing locally here on the Western Slope? How are we making a brighter point in this conversation? And my favorite part is the Community Funding Partnership. Melissa, where are you? Raise your hand. She's right there in the back. Melissa Wills is our Community Funding Partnership Program Manager. So if you have any questions about what I'm about to tell you, she's the one to ask. This was approved by voters in 2020. We thank you so much for your trust in us and your belief in the health of the rivers and the Western Slope. It provides $4.2 million annually to local water projects which are multi-benefit, and that sounds like a lot right here, but if you've tried to complete a water project, you can recognize that $4.2 million doesn't go very far, lots of head shaking. And so one of the things that we've also been doing with that is using it to leverage as a smaller pot to leverage the much larger pots of money which are coming from the federal government, from the state, and we're working with all of these different funding partners to make sure that the bigger projects are getting done. Sometimes we're the first stop for our West Slope communities though because we're very accessible. We have a simple system. Melissa or Amy will pick up the phone and have these conversations with people who are interested in learning more so that they don't miss out on those opportunities just because it's a really, perhaps a dense water smart application grant, which is going to take about 3 months to do. We've leveraged over $63 million. I think that's actually closer to 70 now for West Slope Water. And locally, here are 2 projects which we have helped to fund along with a lot of other supporting partners in your area. The High Country Conservation Center has done a fantastic job of developing some replicable training programs for landscape developers or local municipal landscape leaders learning how to make better use of their water, how to have water efficient practices put into play where they are, because a lot of the handbooks tend to apply to different climates than what we have, and so they developed one that is unique to the high country, and they've gone through several trainings and it's been very successful, and we hope to see a lot more of that. And we're also continuing to fund the Blue River Integrated Water Management Plan because we recognize that the Blue River is the beating heart of this area and that it needs to be protected and that there are a lot of interests and a lot of people who depend on it. And so keeping those complex conversations ongoing and making sure that they have adequate representation and research funding to make their point and to be heard. And that's kind of where I'm going to wrap it up. Make sure that if you haven't already, you sign up and follow us to find out what are we doing. We believe in transparency. We want to hear from you. If you have questions about what the River District is doing in your community or in the broader conversation, we encourage you to reach out. We're here tonight. We're happy to listen and answer your questions, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Just before we jump into our very exciting next presentation from Commissioner Mitchell, just wanted to add a little bit on to what Lindsay was saying about, she mentioned Blue Mesa being our largest reservoir and having that amount of storage is about 800,000 acre-feet of water. And when she talked about the evaporation losses in the system, it's really just out of every year Lake Mead has evaporative losses of 800,000 acre-feet. So Blue Mesa essentially evaporates just off of Lake Mead every year. And so when you take into consideration those evaporative losses along with others in the lower basin and the losses that happen when you transfer water from one point to another, and in the lower basin, you transfer water from Hoover Dam 220 plus miles to the All-American Canal where they then irrigate in the Imperial Valley, that can add up to about 1.5 million acre feet of water that they're not accounting for down there as consumptive use for the lower basin. So we definitely believe that that number, 1.5 million acre feet of water, should be included in some permanent reductions for the lower basin and their overuse to bring back that equitable apportionment that we're supposed to have through the Colorado River Compact. And we think that, the math that's done up here should be the math that's done down there. Pretty simple as that. So with that, I'm going to transition over to our next presentation, and we'll hear from Becky Mitchell, who is the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and also Colorado's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission. So in her role, she's been involved in all of these big river conversations and negotiations with which Lindsay was mentioning, and she represents Colorado and can provide more detail on how the state is engaging in these minute-to-minute updates that are happening with the big river issues. So welcome, Commissioner Mitchell.
Oh yeah, let's see if we can make that. Perfect.
The computer.
Perfect. Oh, thank you, thank you. I'm going to try to slow down my speech tonight compared to last night, but it's highly unlikely that it will happen. And then I started not feeling so bad when I was hearing Lindsay talking, because I was like, she's trying to get it all in too. So if you don't know who I am, I just want to introduce myself. Becky Mitchell. I am the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and also your Colorado commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission. So what that means essentially is that I get to be on the front lines of the discussions with the upper basin states, the lower basin states, the tribes, the feds, and really advocate for the state of Colorado, for the entire upper basin, but also for the entire basin. And so I think it was interesting to hear the presentations and some of the discussion just right before, because those are the messages and the emphasis of what I'm bringing back to the table. And so I love when our talking points are in sync, and I love when we see our stuff getting used too. So it makes me very happy. Sorry. I always forget that I have slides and I just talk freely, but I'm going to try to be better about that. Chances are highly unlikely it won't happen. Before I get into this, I do have to say, like, so much of what we do needs to happen in these realms. And so I didn't say that last night, and I want to make sure that you take that back to your board, and Taylor, you share it with your board members, that I really appreciate the opportunity to be up here and to be able to use this venue to really spread the message that I have, but also take back what I'm hearing, because I think that's critically important. So a lot has happened. You've heard about it. I'll get into a little bit more detail. You saw the picture of Commissioner Tootin with the reclamation announcement. And then you heard the fact that the upper basin states have not missed a deadline. I want that on the record repeatedly, that Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, in response to the commissioner's call for action, did respond. And they responded with a 5-point plan and ways that we can be a part of the solution. We know the problem was not caused in the upper basin. We know that we are using within the compact apportionment far under that. You saw the numbers. We all know that. We know the numbers that are happening in the lower basin, but it doesn't mean that we can't still do things and that we can't be better. We can always be better. And so that was the intention of that, was to say, while we did not cause this, we still have to lead. And so part of that 5-point plan was a program called System Conservation Pilot Program. You saw the comparison between the System Conservation Pilot Program and a potential demand management program, and there's pluses and minuses to those. Congress worked quickly So we put out this 5-point plan and said we would maybe think about doing system conservation. And I don't know, they worked in the lightning speed. I'm wondering what happens with some other things. But in this situation, they were able to get system conservation approved, which actually came somewhat unexpectedly. So we had to kickstart pretty quickly. And so, so we did. And there was some hiccups, for sure. I'll be perfectly honest about that. And we're documenting some of those mistakes that were made in that process to try to make sure we're doing them better moving into the future. In the meantime, these things are happening, and there's multiple other things happening at the same time. You saw the 6-basin state consensus. Lindsay mentioned that one part of that was that call for accounting for evaporation and system losses. I didn't sign a 6-basin state consensus just because of that. I signed it because there was an acknowledgement of hydrologic shortages in the upper basin. And so what that means is that basically there was an acknowledgement that many years we couldn't access, because it's not there, water that we would put to beneficial use. And so as an example, between 2020 and 2021, our water use in the upper basin states went from 4.5 million acre feet to 3.5 million acre feet. I'd love to tell you that we were so aggressive and we did all these conservation measures and that's why that happened. No, that's not why it happened. I'm here to tell you the truth. It happened because it wasn't there. And it happened because impacts were taken on the front lines, on farms, on ranches, on river operations. When folks are running rafting operations, they know the water is not there. When you're looking to irrigate your farm, we know it's not there. And so at that same year, I know this is going to be so surprising, the lower basin took the same amount as the year before. So as Mother Nature was crying and saying, please, please, please hear me, I'm not saying that we heard because we had to. And it is time that everybody hear. And so that's some of the steps that we're trying to take. So 6-state consensus comes out, acknowledges hydrologic shortages, and then there's a release of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. And I want to get into a little bit of detail because that's where some of the news is. And oftentimes, I think, with news, much of what you see and hear is fear-based. And it's to invoke fear. And I was thinking on the way up here, I was driving, and I always think, what do I need to say today? What is pushing me today? And I was especially thinking about this fear-based kind of news that comes out. And I think we get tired as a society of just constantly hearing this, the fear, 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 and that we've got to be focused on solutions. We've got to be focused on the science that drives those solutions, and we have to be the mature people in the room to get there. And so this SEIS comes out. I need someone else to run my slides at some point, and so this draft SEIS comes out, and I had no idea what was going to be in it. Nobody did, which is unusual. Usually there's a leak. But this was one of those that there wasn't. And so what was very exciting about this SEIS, there were 3 alternatives. One of them was basically keep on keeping on and draining the reservoirs. And then 2 were pretty extreme. And they called them bookends. One was, one action was to make cuts to the tune of about 3 million acre feet proportionately. The other was to make cuts based on priority, strict priority. In the upper basin, we know what strict priority looks like. We live it. You don't get it if the water's not there. So kind of a big deal. it started some really good conversations. And if you think any one of those alternatives was going to be the solution, I believe that the federal government made it real clear they wanted everyone mad at them, not just one person mad at them. And so they were trying to make it real clear, like, maybe you guys want to come together. And maybe you guys want to figure this out because we've asked you 3 times to figure it out. And the calls were specifically called for in the lower basin. That is unusual. That is unusual. Where do you think the money is? And so it really, again, primarily addressed the water use in the lower basin. We often say the Secretary of Interior is the water master in the lower basin. We operate differently up here. And essentially modified the 07 guidelines, and changes were subordinate to the compact. So it basically said, these guidelines are not working. When we asked for a mature person in the room, nobody stood up. And so it said, we will stand up if you will not. And so you heard the news that the process was paused. And so I want to give a little bit of the background on that. So when I said nobody would be happy, that brings people to the table, right? And so people started talking and saying, what are we going to do? Just want to let you know, we were not in those rooms in the upper basin. And the reason why was because the problem was called out where the problem exists. And so about a week ago, they said, we have a plan. We'd like for you to support it. And I said, well, okay, where's the numbers? Well, we can't share that yet because the contracts aren't done. Okay, what about enforceability? We can't really talk about that yet because the contracts aren't done. What about these contracts are binding? Can't really talk about it yet. And so the Upper Basin states were like, how do we support something that does involve cuts, but when we're talking about the sheer amount of money that is because these are compensated cuts, some of them. When we're talking about that money, and I kind of yelled this at one point, was this is not any one person's money. This is the American people's money. And what they're asking for that money is some level of security and certainty and ability to know what their future is going to look like. They want the fear out of the news headlines every day. When I go to my soccer games, I still play soccer, I know it's hard to imagine, but just this last Sunday, I was at my soccer game and someone said, are we going to have water? When you mentioned that, Lindsay, I thought about, am I going to have water next year? When I go down and visit my friends in Arizona, yes, I have friends in Arizona, they say to me, should we move back to Colorado? And I say, no, that's a problem. And I say, you stay here in Arizona. But people are asking, are we going to have water? These people have children. And they're afraid. And we have a responsibility. And so, and I think that that's important. So when the Lower Basin brought that proposal and said, can you support it? I thought about this room, and I thought about my friends' children. I thought about my 5 children. I know that's hard to imagine, and their futures. And I said, I don't know enough to support, but we also have a responsibility to make sure money is spent appropriately. And but I also don't want to be negative and say, nope, until we have all the information, we're not going to do it. So what we really looked at doing is, how do we get this analyzed? And how do we get it transparent? When we talk about transparency and moving forward, darn it. Oh, last night I just yelled, and it worked out really well for me. But when we talk about this, I want to be able to support it, but let's analyze it. So what we knew we could support was that analysis. Let's get it out there. Let's see what it means and move forward. And so that was the level that we could support. News doesn't always get it right, and they'll be like, oh, historical consensus. We agreed to really look at this, and that is the right thing to do. Anytime you have a choice to look at something in a deeper way, that someone's saying this might be a solution, I think we have to do that. And so we did. And that's what happened on Monday. And the federal government said, we need to pause because we need the time to look at this and evaluate it and get that information out to everyone. So I think that's important. As commissioner, I want to let you know that Colorado's never been out of compliance. The Upper Basin states have never been out of compliance with the compact. And what's happening when you'll often hear in the news also, oh, they're renegotiating the compact. We are not renegotiating the compact. We're looking at how to operate. And I'll tell you, when I think about these last 20 years, and just so you know, I was not there for the negotiation of these guidelines. But I'm hoping to be sitting there for the negotiations of the upcoming ones. That I've learned from this. We've learned from it. We still have more to learn. And I was thinking about that also on what I want to gain from today and what do I want to give for today. And one of the things that I really want to gain is hearing what's important to people, what they want. I noticed when I talked about the security and people's children that people respond to that, and that's what they want, right? And so that's what I'm taking with me into the room as we look at our future, the future of not just our state, not just the Upper Basin states, but the entire basin. We talked about the 7 states, the 2 countries, the 40 million people, the 30 tribes that have not fully even developed their entitlements of water rights. And so those are the messages that I'm taking in and trying to say, how can we do better? And recognizing there's oftentimes that we think about everybody wants an enemy, right? There is the obvious stick out on the consensus-based letter that it was California that didn't sign that. But I was thinking about it. I said that last night, and I thought about it as I went home, because that's what I do. And I said, that's not what I should have said. I should have said the enemy is how we're the continual overuse. It's not a specific state. It's not a specific use. It is not a that. It's using more than Mother Nature provides. And so that overuse is happening in both California and Arizona. So where I think we can be beneficial, what is our role? Is that we know how to live within our means. We build communities and areas that have built-in flexibilities, because our farmers, our ranchers, our recreationalists know that they can't count on Mother Nature just because they want. And I think about something that my mom would say. She would say, you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. And that's a lot of what this is. We have to be able to really help and teach that this is possible. Communities can be built this way. You can respond to what's available, and you absolutely have to for this generation and the next generations. And so that's the messages that I'm taking in. We are not as good at these kind of meetings because we have such a diverse kind of realm of the work that we do at the CWCB, but we need to get better. I'll just tell you that. And I also thought about that on the way up here. It's like, what can we do better? And so some of the things that we're trying to do is, how do we engage more? And I see you guys doing it. It makes me so happy. How can we engage more? How can I get the feedback that I need? Because when I'm going and doing these meetings, they're not necessarily enjoyable. And they're rough. And they're really rough some days. And I remember walking out of one meeting, just so you guys get a little bit of the drama, and I was like, gosh, we did so good. We were so aligned. 4 Upper Basin states, so aligned. We stood strong. why am I still so sad? And I would like walk through the airport, and I'm getting teary-eyed just thinking about it. And I was like, why am I still so sad? And it's because there's still this stubbornness and inability to move. And what I think we need to do, and I want to make sure, and part of the reason I'm here, is that as we push others to move at a rate that they can handle, right? You try to create change, and figuring out what that rate is really hard, but it needs to happen faster now because we didn't change when it was time to change. But I need to go with all of Colorado. I need to be able to walk into those meetings and say, Colorado will not let me sign on to something where you're continuing to overuse. Colorado will not let me sign on to something where we don't factor in the environment. Colorado will not let me sign on to something that makes agricultural users in the upper basin less than the agricultural users in the lower basin, where our agriculture is valued as less than, where our people are valued as less than. That's the language that I need to take in. And so as I thought about what do I need to gain from this today, is starting to build that coalition where I can go in and say, this is what Colorado will not allow me to do. And we did that last weekend. I said I cannot sign on to something until I know exactly what it does. It's no judgment of what you are doing, but it's I need to know because I need to be able to look at the eye in these meetings and say, this is what this does. And so that's all I have, and I totally went off script, and there you go.
Welcome Zane Kessler, who is our Director of Government Relations at the Colorado River District. We also are thrilled to welcome tonight. He's going to be having a discussion. We're going to kind of focus a little more down on the state level tonight. We recently had our state's legislative session conclude, and so we're excited to welcome Speaker of the House of Representatives, Julie McCluskey, and Senator Dylan Roberts, both of whom are your representative and senator for Summit County. And Zane is going to be discussing the latest legislative session with the two of them. So thank you and welcome.
One thing to note, for the first time in 23 years, the Speaker of the House, Julie McCluskey, we had a speaker from the West Slope, not since Russ George. Thank you for your leadership. And then also Senator Roberts, who had been in the House representing the West Slope, Yampa, and the Middle Colorado regions, stepped up into the Senate. And so good to have him as the chair of the Senate Ag and Natural Resource Committee. And so thank you both for being here, and thank you for your work this last session. I'm going to start at kind of a higher level. You are both native Coloradans, you're both West Slope residents, you both understand the importance of water to our economies, to our way of life on the Western Slope. I'd like to ask you a softball question, if it's okay. I'd like to know how you as legislators account for the importance of water on the Western Slope, and how do you work? You're really kind of steering the ship in the Senate when it comes to water policy. Julie, you hold the gavel. How do you think about water as you approach policymaking in Denver?
Sure.
Okay, the speaker first. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be home. Hi. I am really excited, and first want to start by thanking the Colorado River District and certainly CWCB for tonight's event. And the Blue River Watershed Group. I'm not sure who else here with BWRG, right? Well, no, BRWG. All those acronyms. It is so important that we elevate the conversations around water, and this is certainly an important way to do it. You know, Zane, I love this question because I think for all of us in this room, the Colorado River, our waterways are so much more than just water. They symbolize and embody what it means to be a Coloradan, right? They are a part of our outdoor recreation economies, our tourism economies. They are the beauty of the environment that we each celebrate, and thank goodness we have in our backyards every single day. And so for me, as a Colorado girl who grew up in Lakewood, have spent most of my adult life in the mountains, I, truly value what water means to us in more than just an economic way, but a spiritual way as well. And really delighted that we've been able to, Senator Roberts is an amazing water leader and partner in all things in the General Assembly, but that we've been able to prioritize water for the communities that we represent, for the people of this great state. And it's really been, I think, exciting to talk about Western Slope values and our commitment to water this past session.
Thank you, and thanks as well to everybody for being here. It's exciting to be here talking water with all of you, especially about 2 weeks, just a little over 2 weeks since we ended our legislative session, so it's nice to be back home as well and decompressing a little bit, but going over all the things that we got done. I have a lot of similar things to say that the speaker does about the inherent importance of water in my life and how we've been able to transfer that down to the Capitol. I grew up in Steamboat a lot, the tubing on the Yampa River, fishing on the Elk River is part of my childhood, and now I live in Eagle County and walk my almost 1-year-old son along the Eagle River almost every day, and just the intrinsic value and power that gives to all of us is so important. And I think going down to the Capitol now, I've done 5 legislative sessions of trying to bring that importance both on a personal level but also to the economics of our districts down to the Capitol, and convince our Front Range colleagues or colleagues who don't have that type of connection about the importance of water. I would say, when I got into the legislature 4 years ago, that was harder to do. Talking to my colleagues about water issues, whether we were working on the in-stream flow bill or just even the water projects bill, the importance of funding the water plan and water infrastructure projects, was harder to convince some of my colleagues that those were bills that needed to get passed. That's changed. That has really changed, and for better and for worse. I think it's been driven a lot by the scary headlines that we see in the newspaper every day about the Colorado River. But I think people along the Front Range and in other parts of the state are waking up to the challenges that we know we have out here, and empathizing with our challenges here, and knowing that in order to preserve the Western Slope, both our economy and the beautiful place that we live and they like to come visit depends on us protecting our water resources. So there's definitely been a sea change, pardon the pun, but over the last year or so down at the Capitol in a good way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue to my next question for you. It's a bill that didn't garner a lot of headlines, but it's a bill we see every year, and not a lot of people understand what it is or the importance of it to the water community. This year, I think the number was Senate Bill 177. Historically, the chair of the House and Senate Ag committees come together to develop this, what we call the projects bill. It was a big one this year. Can you talk to us about that bill and some of the things that are important to the West Slope in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, Senate Bill 177 was the projects bill this year, started in the Senate, of course, and passed with large bipartisan support. This is a bill that happens every year, thankfully, no matter what, at least is my understanding, for decades and decades. But it's the bill that funds all of the conservation projects, the water plan, municipal infrastructure projects, the projects that get submitted ahead of time through the project's resolution, and then money allocated to the CWCB and other entities to help disperse the money. This year was I think the largest amount of money that we've ever seen, at least in a very, very long time. It ended up being a little over $90 million. 25 of which came from sports gambling revenue. After Proposition DD passed a few years, we are really seeing the benefit of that. $25 million that would have never existed if not for that ballot measure. But things like $15 million for the endangered fish conservation program here on the Western Slope. I think $2 million to a river district effort for agriculture conservation and ag water rights, and then municipal projects across the state, conservation efforts across the state. So and the JBC, the Joint Budget Committee, is responsible for ensuring that bill gets funded. They were all very willing, despite none of the JBC members being from the Western Slope anymore, but they were very willing to help us get as much money as possible for that project bill. So that's very exciting.
Well, it's important to us water wonks that are watching the numbers, and it certainly was one of the biggest that I've ever seen. I think it is the largest ever, and thanks to the voters for Proposition DD, and now we have a dedicated source of revenue specifically to funding the water plan and making sure that that important plan has money behind it. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go to the speaker. You, in your 6 years, or in your full tenure under the Gold Dome, wildfire has always been a big issue for you. Your district, even after redistricting, encompasses communities where wildfire is front and center. I know that was important to you this session. Wildfire and water are intricately connected. Our forests and our public lands are our largest reservoir in the state. Talk to us a little bit about some of the accomplishments on the wildfire front.
Thank you for the question, Zane. I want to start by mentioning the long bill, the budget that we pass every year. And in addition to the projects bill, there were great investments made in the Department of Natural Resources around staffing up our capacity in CWCB and making sure that Becky Mitchell has the army that she needs to be able to work on the Colorado Compact compliance and the many issues facing the river. In addition to that, we really recognize this year the challenges around wildfire capacity building. We made investments this year in our workforce, making sure that we have both firefighters and forest management professionals working on our forest health statewide. The threats of wildfire over the last several years, we focused a great deal of money and time and attention on wildfire mitigation, more than $100 million, and making sure that we're ready by clearing WUI spaces, making sure, the Buffalo Mountain fire that was just a few years ago, for those of you that have been in the county a while, you'll remember that the mitigation project right up there on Wilderness saved property. That is such a powerful example of what mitigation can do in this state. We've continued to make those investments where we can. We've also made a great deal of investments in response and certainly suppression. We bought another Firehawk helicopter, a state-of-the-art machine that helps take care of those fires when they are just beginning, before they grow big enough to get a name and get a headline on a TV show. And the second Firehawk that we have now purchased, while it won't be here in time for this wildfire season, we do anticipate will be ready for us next year, and that one will be stationed on the western slope specifically for use in our areas, because we know the threat of a wildfire, given the past few years, certainly explosive. I also want to mention that there was investments made into the health of our forests. Reforestation continues to be a priority for the state, so the State Forest Service received dollars to help with the nursery up north at CSU. We also made investments in a wildfire resiliency building codes board, an effort to start establishing building codes and making sure that as we continue to grow as a state, that we are thinking smarter and safer when it comes to building. So very excited with some of those investments, and thanks for asking, Zane.
Yep, of course. All right, back to water policy. The two of you led a conversation that lasted the entire session around drought on the Colorado River and the importance of ensuring that West Slope, the communities affected by drought on the Colorado River, and especially as it relates to many of the interstate issues that we've heard about in the presentations prior to us, ensuring that those communities had a voice within the conversation. That policy conversation that was, I'll say, difficult at times, led to Senate Bill 295, which I think Lindsay referenced quickly in her presentation, but it creates the Colorado River Drought Task Force. Talk to us a little bit about that, what you hope to see come out of that, and how did we get to this point, and what do you expect to see going forward from that Drought Task Force?
So, yes, very excited that Senate Bill 295 was signed into law by the governor on Saturday in Glenwood Springs. I think that there was a picture up there earlier. What that will do is create and initiate the Colorado River Drought Task Force. It's going to be a 17-member task force that will meet over the course of this summer and this fall to determine and have tough conversations to determine what, if anything, the state at a statewide level needs to do as far as the future of the Colorado River. Things like have conversations about demand management programs, about drought security programs, conservation in agriculture, conservation in municipal water use, and other programs that could be helpful, initiatives we could start in Colorado. Also determine, as we get the federal guidelines, about the historic amount of funding that's going to be available from the bipartisan infrastructure law that the Congress and the President signed 2 years ago, and the Inflation Reduction Act from last year had a lot of money in it for drought security in the West. We want them to consider everything. We want everything to be on the table, have those really tough conversations. We think that the makeup of the task force is incredibly diverse and is going to reflect all of the relevant voices in this conversation. And they need to make recommendations back to us at the legislature by the end of this December. So as we head into our next legislative session in January, we have a well-reasoned, stakeholder set of recommendations that we can consider. What led us here, though, I think is also very important because, as you mentioned, Zane, the people who are going to experience the most pain from continued drought on the Colorado River, at least in our state, are the folks that live out here on the western slope. We certainly understand that a lot of water goes over the divide into the metro region, and they have seats on the task force, and those water providers and people that live out there. But the most immediate impact, if there were further cuts or curtailments on the Colorado River, or if there was a reduction imposed by the federal government, would happen out here on the western slope. And so it's important that we, I think, put in place programs that recognize that have a regional base approach and regional voices involved if we are going to go down the road of demand management, if we are going to go down the road of reducing water use. And we wanted to make sure that we were recognizing that important factor. I think this is also important to do because, and Commissioner Mitchell mentioned this just a few minutes ago, Colorado has been a leader on drought security and doing our part on the Colorado River. But she also said we need to continue to lead. We can't just sit on our hands and expect that if California and Arizona will solve the problem unilaterally. We hope they do. They certainly need to do a lot more than they're doing now. But why not think about what we can do now and on a voluntary basis, on a compensated basis with all this money available from the federal government? Why not continue to lead and be proactive to solve this crisis? Because that's in the best interest of our constituents, of all of you, but particularly our agriculture industry and our outdoor recreation economy that depends on the water continuing to flow.
I don't have much to add to that. It was brilliant. I guess I would really like to lift up the leadership that we saw from the River District. This work, it didn't begin just a year ago in earnest, although it did. Conversations with environmental groups, the River District really at the table leading with other Western resource advocates and others, saying that now is a moment, a very special moment, when Colorado can step into a space and demonstrate a vision, leadership that can really be a call to action for all states dependent on the Colorado River. And Zane, we don't sing your praises enough. We don't sing everybody at the Colorado River District's praises enough for coming to the table when we know water interests are entrenched. We know how difficult it is to move in this space when it comes to policy, but we saw a passion and interest like we had never seen before. And Senator Roberts and I had a lot of big conversations. I want to thank Commissioner Mitchell, because there were times where we weren't always seeing eye to eye, but trying to find a path forward, recognizing how important it was for us to step up. This task force, I believe, is an excellent next step in trying to secure our water future and really creating a joint, a collaborative approach to what needs to happen internally, intrastate, when it comes to the management of the Colorado River, and could be a model for not only our state, but others as well.
Thanks. I'm going to chime in on that, actually. We have a couple of minutes. When we were having conversations in the Speaker's office or at Water Congress about this task force or the potential for demand management programs at all. You know, I think I told you, Speaker McCluskey, this is not a popular idea. You talk to folks on the Western Slope, demand management doesn't get them excited. But in the end, I think the resounding opinion was it's better to lead than be led. And really looking back at many of the other water successes we have experienced as a state, the water plan is a great example. The Russ George model of making sure that the local communities, those communities that are impacted the most, have a seat at the table and that their authorities within the process are clear. And so I'll wrap up this topic just by thanking you both again for your work to represent and protect our interests on the Western Slope, but also making sure that all water users impacted by this, Front Range utilities, Front Range municipalities, agricultural organizations, and others have a seat at that table and an opportunity to identify what tools in the toolbox we may need in that hotter, drier future. So my last question is really just, where do we go from here? You know, over the last 5 years since, and really consistent with much of the crisis on the Colorado River and the front page headlines increasing, we've seen the state devoting more resources. We've seen more attention paid to the issues that we're facing on the Western Slope related to drought, related to climate change. How do we keep the momentum? What do we do in subsequent sessions to ensure that we are protecting our water resources and preparing the Western Slope and our water users and our rivers for that hotter, drier future that is likely to come with less water?
I'll start. Water is not a political issue in the traditional sense of the word. It's not a Republican-Democrat issue, right? It is an issue in a way that I think, as Senator Roberts referenced, has finally risen to the top of the list. We hear about water needs, water priorities in our districts, always have in my years serving. But now there is recognition and there is discussion about water at a much more sophisticated level down with our urban partners. And I think that growing sense of what water means to this state is serving us in very important ways. You know, I know there are probably many members from the ski industry in this room, but I do have to give a shout out to Alan Hensroth and Tony back there. Hi guys. You know, every time I'm at a basin, I am reminded about climate change and water needs because it is such a visible conversation for that group of employees and that resort. And I think about how Summit County has led on water conversations now, not just years, but decades. And I think the rest of the state is catching up to us. And I'm truly excited, Zane, for what I think will be a powerful next chapter in Colorado's future. You know, not only that we are protecting water for generations to come, but that, again, we have this moment to establish ourselves as true leaders in what it means to battle climate change, drought, and protect something that is so critically valuable to all of us.
So I certainly echo all of that and know that we have a lot more work to do. I think what I would like to leave you with is, and you've alluded to it, that conversations in water are hard. We have a lot of tough debates down at the Capitol and in politics in general. A lot of them fall along party lines or ideological lines. Water is different. Water is so ingrained in our way of life out here in the West, and for a lot of people it's hard to envision change. Even small change is really hard. And for good reason. We don't want to make drastic changes one way or the other. But I think what confronts or what faces us over the next few years at the state legislature, certainly at the federal level with our downriver partners or adversaries, if you will, are really hard conversations. And there's going to be some difficult decisions that have to get made and some pretty big sacrifices that will have to happen. And so I hope that we can continue our momentum here at the state level. There is a unique opportunity, I think, where people across the state and people across different sectors, whether it's agriculture, environmental groups, outdoor recreation economies, local governments, state government, of a collective understanding of we need to come together and solve this problem. We need to figure out how we protect the Colorado, both here in our state and downriver. And so I hope we don't get afraid of those tough conversations. And I think both the speaker and I are willing to keep pushing that ball forward. But all of us in this room who care about water, everybody who is involved in these negotiations, we cannot let our long-standing traditions and animosity that sometimes pops up get in the way of doing big things, because if we don't get this right, the consequences are obviously pretty devastating.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. I just, again, thank you both. Summit County and the entire Western Slope really are, I'll just say, lucky to have legislators on both sides of the aisle that work together. I am never, it never ceases to amaze me how West Slope legislators, whether it's you and Perry Will or you and Representative Mark Catlin, who politically speaking, I doubt there's anything that you agree on in the true political sense, or much that you agree on in the true political sense. But when water comes into the picture, you guys work together and stick together as a West Slope delegation. And just know that it's appreciated. And again, Summit County, you are well represented. So thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you so much again to Senator Roberts and Speaker McCluskey and to you, Zane, for that wonderful conversation. I just want to kind of echo some of those sentiments that came about, the fact that, and what Zane has brought up, that strange bedfellows can come together and produce a bill like the Drought Task Force. That water can be very contentious, but it can also bring people together across the aisle and across the state and hopefully across the Colorado River Basin as a whole. I also want to just note something that Commissioner Mitchell also pointed out in just how important these meetings are and events like this to be face-to-face with people who are in the room making policy decisions. And I want to give a quick shout out again to Josh Blanchard, who's on your board of county commissioners here. He is now in the room. So thank you, Josh and Summit County, for all the work you do. And then the fact that we have representatives here from the county, the River District is regional government across the Western Slope representing 15 counties. We have your Summit County state electeds, and then Commissioner Mitchell, who is Colorado's representative in the Upper Colorado River Commission, all here tonight in person, face to face. We hope that you'll stick around. I know we're going to be a little bit over time probably, but we hope you'll stick around for questions and really engage in that way that Becky mentioned in terms of, letting these people know, your decision makers know, the people you elect into office, what's important to you here and now in Summit County. So thank you for being here and for being a part of this. And now we're going to have some presentations looking at some of the really focusing in now on more local issues here in Summit County with your reservoir operations and with folks that have been mentioned in conversations. We have Victor Lee, who's a civil engineer with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, who's going to speak first about federal operations and the intersection of the operations between Dillon and Green Mountain reservoirs, which Brendan had referenced earlier tonight. And then after Victor, we'll have Nathan Elder, who's with Denver Water, come up and talk about those Denver Water operations here on the Western Slope. So please first welcome Victor Lee.
Okay, well, I really appreciate you guys giving me the time to talk to you about your reservoir. And in particular, I work for the Bureau of Reclamation. I'm out of the Eastern Colorado Area Office in Loveland, Colorado, and we are responsible for the management of 2 trans-basin diversion projects, including the Colorado Big Thompson project, of which Green Mountain is a part of, and also the Frying Pan, Arkansas project. I want to say, first and foremost, I am a Fed, and people have talked about Feds today, but first and foremost, I am here because I work for you. I operate this reservoir for your benefit, and each and every one of you in this room, if you live in Summit County, are probably beneficiaries of the Colorado Big Thompson project. Okay. Anyways, what I'm going to talk today about is primarily a little background on the Colorado Big Thompson project. I'm going to focus in on the Green Mountain Reservoir and particularly the Blue River Decree, which was the negotiated decree settlement that's been going on for quite a while with Denver and Colorado Springs in order to make sure that there's no injury to Green Mountain Reservoir and the benefits that it provides each and every one of you. And finally, I'm going to give you really brief what it's looking like Green Mountain's going to do this year given the water that we have this year. First and foremost, the Colorado Big Thompson project is a large project. It was authorized in 1937 by President Roosevelt, and we've heard that number elsewhere today, 1937. It just so happens that the River District, Northern Water Conservancy District, and in fact the Conservancy District statutes that are all written within the Constitution of Colorado were largely implemented because of the Colorado Big Thompson project. Northern wanted the project, Colorado wanted the project. We had to figure out a way that we could enter into a contract with the federal government to pay back this project for all of the benefit it would give you. So in particular, Green Mountain Reservoir was a part of the Colorado Big Thompson project that was built specifically to ensure that there would be no injury to this trans-basin operation for the western slope of Colorado. As I mentioned before, Bureau of Reclamation operates Green Mountain Reservoir for you as part of the Colorado Big Thompson project. We operate the project as a whole in collaboration with Northern Water Conservancy District, which is the beneficiary that takes the water that we divert from the Colorado River to the South Platte Basin. And the CBT is a large project, very complex. We store almost 1 million acre-feet in all of the storage reservoirs. And we've heard that number too. So that happens to be about the evaporation that we see on Lake Mead, at least at the current level. When it's higher, it evaporates a lot more. We have 5 storage reservoirs, including Lake Granby and Horsetooth Reservoir, Carter Reservoir, and Green Mountain. We have hundreds of miles of tunnels and canals just within the delivery of the system to get it to the South Platte. And we have 6 power plants, and 3 pumping plants to make the whole system work. Very complex. It's been going for a while now. Just as a point, this is the Colorado Big Thompson, how it looks today. First and foremost, we have Green Mountain down in the lower corner, which is the Western Slope Reservoir. We have Lake Granby, which is the large storage reservoir. It pumps the water, it sends it under the divide, not over the divide, as Senator Roberts says. Most of the water goes under the divide. And then finally, it arrives, drops almost 3,000 feet through multiple power plants, and then it is delivered ultimately to Carter Reservoir and Horsetooth Reservoir for Northern Water to deliver that water to their water users in the South Platte Basin. Let's see. I think it's really important, and we've talked about the upper basin states. One of the key elements of the Colorado Big Thompson project is that water has to be used or consumed within the state of Colorado. So one of our objectives here is we can only deliver the water to the east slope that can be consumed within Colorado. As a result of that, we serve water users in Colorado all the way from the Nebraska state line all the way to the Utah state line as part of the Colorado Big Thompson. We've talked about the collection system over here, how it delivers water to the east. But I'm going to focus in on Green Mountain, and that's really my discussion today. Green Mountain was built as the first part of the project. It was built during World War II, stopped for a little bit, then was rebuilt. but has been operational since the early 40s or late 40s, and was originally designed to make sure that 1/3 of the water would be available to allow the Colorado Trans-Basin Project take water east year-round. The remaining 2/3 was or designated and obligated to meeting the current and future needs of the western slope of Colorado. So in 1955, a court, not that easy, but by 1955, after much negotiation and much contention, the federal court issued a decree for the Blue River for Green Mountain, which includes water rights for the storage and for the power generation. This included a large amount of stipulations with Denver and Colorado Springs, which both had interest at the time of developing water rights so they could take water from the Blue River and send it to the urban areas on the Front Range. Well, this litigation is going on today. For 70 years, we continue to be in litigation on this. I thought we were going to solve it all during my tenure, but I don't think it's going to happen. So what does the Blue River Decree give you as beneficiaries of Green Mountain Reservoir? Well, one of the things that it said, well, Green Mountain is going to be senior to all of the other projects that were proposed in the Blue River Decree. So with a 1935 priority date, it shares an equal priority date with the collection system, but it is senior to the diversion rights of Colorado Springs and expansion of their project and of Denver's Blue River collection system. It did allow or stipulate that Denver and Colorado Springs would be allowed to divert water even though they're junior. However, the Secretary of the Interior, as the manager of this reservoir and the Colorado Big Thompson as a whole, must give them approval to divert that water. And in order to divert that water, they have to ensure that Green Mountain Reservoir will fill and Green Mountain Reservoir will continue to meet its obligation to the western United States. Western Colorado, starting from the Continental Divide all the way to the Utah state line. And finally, any water that is going to be taken away from Green Mountain Power Plant, Denver and Colorado Springs need to compensate Green Mountain Reservoir for that lost power. And we've been operating this way ever since Dillon filled in '63 with the expansion of the Colorado Springs Continental Hoosier project, and it's working well. We're still in court, but we are we are working through that. Finally, so what does this all mean for Green Mountain? Well, there's a lot of demand on the Blue River system. The Dillon Reservoir holds almost 250,000 acre-feet. Green Mountain holds about 150,000 acre-feet. Continental Hoosier can divert 16, 18, 19,000 acre-feet a year. And so with all of the demand for this, that means that Green Mountain doesn't fill every year. But if Green Mountain does not fill, Denver and Colorado Springs are still on the hook to pay Green Mountain Reservoir's obligation to the western Colorado Basin. It does impact how full Green Mountain, it will also impact how much water Green Mountain will release. During years where we have substitution, where there is water owed by Denver, we will take that water and deliver it from all of these other reservoirs, Wolford, Dillon, Williams Fork, Rudeye Reservoir, to keep Green Mountain whole, and Green Mountain will release less water. So over the last 2 years, in 21 and 22, was a substitution year, and during that period, you would, if you were a boater, and calling me up on the phone and saying, well, why isn't Green Mountain releasing enough water to boat the Blue River? And he says, it's because we're allowing the cities to divert that water and replace what is owed to Green Mountain out of these other reservoirs. And in addition, the cities pay the U.S. government, several thousand kilowatt hours of replaced power every year. And an important thing, certainly for the people here in Summit County, is that there are beneficiaries of Green Mountain Reservoir upstream of Dillon Reservoir. And as part of the stipulation on the Blue River Decree, your ability to divert water out of priority, or as the Speaker McCluskey said, make all that wonderful snow, is because Green Mountain is able to replace that water and allow them to divert.
All right, next up we have Nathan Elder from Denver Water. He is the manager of water resources there, so please welcome Nathan.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm here to talk about the big reservoir in your backyard, Dillon Reservoir. So this is Denver Water's largest reservoir. On average, about 30% of Denver Water's supply comes from the Blue River. It's one of our trickier reservoirs to manage. A lot of things going on here. So we've got surface water recreation, we've got downstream on the Blue, rafting, fishing, flooding concerns in certain years. And then we've also got our Trans-Basin diversion in the Roberts Tunnel that takes water over to the east slope. Each of these charts is going to look the same, so I'm going to cover that first. So in green, we have May 1st to yesterday's current operations. Our blue line, for context, shows the historical average. The black line is our average future forecast, and then this band shows the range of that future forecast. So starting with inflow, we're going to be a bit below average. Again, not a huge snowpack year, but the information that we've seen from the ASO flights this year, I think we're going to be pretty close to this black line or somewhere possibly up above. We've seen a little bit more snow in those measurements than the CBRC forecasts are showing.
In June 18th, we expect the reservoir to be full. When you see this black line go above our full level in orange, that means the reservoir will be spilling. One of the things we're going to try and do this year, we've been working with the Blue River Work Group to better understand the fishery below Dillon. And when we spill, we're going to try and do it slower so that we have less impact on the changing the water temperature below the reservoir for the fish. We also expect the reservoir to stay full well into July. Moving on to outflow. Currently we are at 100 CFS out. We'll be well below average for the year. Again, we've got a little bit more space to fill this year than we normally do. The biggest thing to take away from this slide is we're not forecast to be anywhere near those action levels for flooding. So that's not a concern this year. We're thinking our peak outflow is going to be right around 500 CFS. Hopefully we'll be able to sustain that for a little bit for rafting. We'll keep the rafting community updated as we continually get new forecasts. Looking to Roberts Tunnel operations and what's going to go to the east slope. Currently, the Roberts Tunnel is off. We're not taking any water over to the east slope. That started on May 11th when we had the big rainstorms. We filled the majority of our east slope reservoirs. We only have about 6,500 acre feet to go to fill those. We expect Roberts Tunnel to be off at least until the end of the month, and if we continue to see this wet weather, that could be even longer. So yeah, currently here is where we're at, well below average, and then even our forecast for June, right now we're looking to have below average tunnel flows. July, that will likely peak up above average and then be slightly above average again in August. Continuing with what is going on the east slope. I wish I had them to show you here this year, but we've heard feedback from the west slope on conservation, and it's just debuted yesterday, so when I provided this, I wasn't allowed to share the information, but we were bringing back our Use Only What You Need campaign. So when you go to Denver, you're going to start seeing those billboards. You're going to see the buses, and we'll hear radio ads, TV ads, social media. So we're really going to start pushing that conservation message again. Further, the past summer, Denver Water signed on to an MOU to help reduce non-functional turf, so the grass that the only time it's used is when you walk on it to mow it. Again, additional parts of that are the furthering conservation, both indoor and outdoor. So just to wrap up, this year Dillon Reservoir will fill. We'll probably see a peak outflow near 500 CFS. Not anticipate to have a sustained outflow above 500. We'll be full around June 18th, and marinas will be fully operational from June 18th through Labor Day.
Thank you so much, Nathan. We really appreciate the work you guys do on the conservation front. The Use Only What You Need campaign is great, and so excited to hear that that's starting up again. Also on the non-functional turf, it's always funny to me to hear how different people describe it. Walking only when you mow it is one. I've also heard, would you put a baby on it? If not, non-functional. So probably wouldn't put a baby on a highway median grass. So anyway, last but certainly not least, bringing back up Kendra Fuller with the Blue River Watershed Group, our wonderful partners in this event every year, and a wonderful local nonprofit that does some amazing work here in Summit County. So we're excited to listen to her, and just hope you all will stick around for Q&A as well after. I know we're bumping up to our 8 p.m. timeline, but once Kendra is finished, we'll have all our presenters back up to do Q&A. So please welcome back Kendra Fuller.
Awesome, thanks you guys. I'll try and talk fast so you can't understand me. Then it won't matter if what I'm saying makes any sense, right? All right, so the Blue River Watershed Group, we are here to help take what is happening across the state, across our country, and make it local. So we are the local action, and we're very grateful to have some amazing partners here with us today. But the things that are happening here locally that you all can be involved in, that you can make a difference in, are research, restoration, and planning. So when we look at the Colorado State Water Plan, it's a wonderful plan. They asked local groups like us to start working on planning for the future. So what are we expecting to see as trends, and what do we need within our community to support both the river, our consumptive needs for our municipalities, but also for the environment. And locally, our community resoundingly said, what's up with the fisheries below Dillon Dam? So in 2016, we lost the gold medal fishery status through a lot of that river, besides what's in town, and that is primarily stocked fish. So what is happening? Why aren't our fish recruiting? Why aren't they surviving, growing and thriving? And so we looked at some of the factors that are limiting that river, and we did a lot of research in the past 3 years to identify the exact reasons why these fish aren't surviving or thriving. And so you'll see those limiting factors here. You know, we're looking at habitat, we're researching the periphyton, the macroinvertebrates, the flow. We're looking at the temperature, and then we're also considering water quality. So there's a lot of things happening in our watershed that are maybe being more challenging to these fish than we would hope, but what can we then do about it? So our wonderful scientists broke the river into reaches, and they looked at each of these sections and said, what is challenge in these sections? And they are creating these report cards so that people like me and maybe like you can actually understand what exactly they came across and found in all of this research. So the summary here is that green is good and red is bad. And we've got, working from the right-hand side of the screen is the Dillon Dam, and then north we're going to flow up to the U.S. Forest Service campground. And you can kind of see that there's all these factors on the left-hand side that you can't read because it's too small, and then all of the grades running across that stream. And how is our river doing? How is the habitat functioning? How is this river health functioning? What are we giving it a grade for? And you know, we've got a big impoundment. We have the Dillon Dam, and really it's difficult to manage a fishery just below a dam that is a bottom release dam like ours is. So we have some serious temperature challenges. Denver Water is working with us within their operations to try and support those fisheries and mix that water when they spill so we don't have a cold temp and then spike on up to a hot temp. It's never hot. But if you're in the river, you'll notice your feet are less numb. So it is noticeable, right? But we've given them these grades, and then what we found out of that. So this is where we've got pool habitat across all of those reaches. We're seeing a lack of pool habitat. So we have shallow pools or a lack thereof. So those fish don't have a place to hide behind. They don't have a place to go down in. We have a lack of spawning gravels. We have a flow regime of this river that historically has looked the same since the dam was put in, that used to have huge flows and flushing flows that now we would flood Silverthorne if we allowed 3,000 CFS to flow through there. So we're not moving gravel and we're not seeing additional gravel coming in. We've got a lack of diversity in terms of our macroinvertebrates, our bugs, and our periphyton, which is the algae. And then we've got those dam-impacted water temperatures, which I think is fun to say, dam-impacted water temperatures. But you'll see, you know, what we've got for some of our pools are these man-made weirs. They're not functioning anymore. They're making our already shallow, low-flowing river just wider and shallower. So we need to do something about that. And we've got all these smart people in the room, these technical advisory team, and they prioritize 2 reaches of the river that they think really we can make a big difference. And one of them is right here in our backyard, and it is through the town of Silverthorne. So there's about 1.5 miles through the town that we can remove those old rock weirs and narrow in our channel so it still functions as a good fishery habitat when there's the low flows at 50 CFS, which we see 80% of the time, and then can also still have room for it to flood over and create wetlands on the sides. So that when we see something like 1,800 CFS, there's room for that river. We're not flooding your houses. Denver won't flood you. But the river has room to grow, but is sized appropriately for what we're seeing at our river, that our river is going to flow at now. And then the other section of river is going to be from the U.S. Forest Service campground just south, going upstream about 1.5 miles. So there's a lot of habitat there that could really function well if we actually address it and make that river function the way it's supposed to. So what does that exactly mean? Well, Peggy Bailey is in the room. She's in the back. She's a genius. And she's come up with some of these ideas on what we could actually do with surveys, science-based activities we can do in the river. And these are minimally invasive activities, such as putting in a rock bar, a point bar, You might see pools on outside bends. You might see boulder clusters. And then you'll also see constructed trails. So instead of having social trails that erode the side of our rivers across the entire length, we might have access points that are designated. And we're working with the town to make sure that those are appropriate and appropriately placed in public access locations. So that's what you're going to be seeing. This master plan will be published on our website. And this might be a section of the river, might be right in your backyard and you're wondering what's going on. We will have this updated on our website at theblueriverwatershed.org. So check that out. And yeah, so you'll see pools, you'll see trails, and we really want to encourage folks to support this project. We're going to be going into some of those big buckets of funding that folks were talking about earlier to try and get federal money to make this happen, to adjust our river to the flows and the conditions that we're seeing and will continue to see into the future. One other little note, we have a couple of things that are happening outside of here, and that is the Swan River. So Summit County government and the town of Breckenridge have worked on the Swan River for years. We started efforts in 2009, came up with a concept plan in 2013, and then in 2019, we've moved from that pre-construction mess, which is just a bunch of tailings piles, to a functional river where they're actually doing successful fisheries surveys, and we've got recruitment of natural species coming back into our river that was no river and nothing to look at besides a bunch of rocks for over 100 years. So we're going to continue that effort to the second half of the project. We're moving off of public land onto private land, and that project is still just as important because once we finish the project, we will have 43 miles of connected perennial river. So it is important that we move off of that public land and finish the project on that private land, and we have the support of the community and the local government to do that. And the landowners, they also gave us some permission to do that. One aspect of that is as soon as you reconnect a river, you might accidentally reintroduce more invasives. And since we have brook trout in the Blue River, and those can then travel into the North Fork once it's connected, we need to make sure that we're actually putting in something that most folks will scoff at, and it is a fish barrier. And it is intentional as a fish barrier to protect a cutthroat trout population on the North Fork. So we're moving from this slide here that does not prohibit brookies from walking up it to something that's going to be more like a drop structure so that those brook trout can't walk up or around what they are currently doing. So then one other thing to mention is that your community is incredibly cohesive in terms of working together. You have a collaborative community, and the Summit County Outdoor Coalition is an effort amongst a bunch of nonprofits, a bunch of entities and groups within the community that's working to think landscape scale. And we want to be leaders of the state and show the state that we know how to collaborate on wildlife, wildfire, recreation, water, and climate resiliency. These are the things that we need to work together for. So whether or not you're part of Blue River Watershed Group or another nonprofit or another agency in the community, thank you all for having the tough conversations and figuring out how we work together. If you do want to join the Watershed Group, we'd love to have you. And there's a couple of things that we could really benefit from your input on. One of them is sign up for our newsletter. We'll let you know what's going on. You can volunteer. We've got a willow planting on the Swan River off Tiger Road on Saturday, so sign up for that. We'd love to see you out there. You can come to a beer festival if that's more your jam and support the watershed that way at the Town of Dillon's Beer Festival, June 17th. Or you can donate, you can support us, you can become a river monitor. Mark, who is in the room, just learned today how to read temperature loggers. It's his excuse to get out to the river. He has to go check the temperature. But really, he's just going to go fish. So then the last thing, and I know I said this earlier, but please spread one tidbit of information that you got from this night to somebody else in our world, in our community. The information that you all have gained tonight, the education, that's invaluable. So please share. And thank you guys so much for all of your time.